Attack on Titan is one of the most popular titles out there. The first season of this show was a cultural phenomenon both in Japan and outside of it. This show felt larger than life, no pun intended, and it was a massively ambitious project. In this video, we'll talk about the first season of Attack on Titan and why it looked so amazing. But before we get into that, let's talk about how this show came to be. Witstudio, the name synonymous with Attack on Titan, wasn't really an entity back then. It used to be a single room within production IG, one without any windows according to the studio president. The first season of Attack on Titan was the first Witstudio production. So then how did this new studio produce a massive show like AOT? Well, the studio might have been new, but it had access to a lot of names because of its association with production IG. AOT director Tetsuro Araki was internationally recognized even back then, having directed major shows such as Death Note and Guilty Crown. And he brought action animators Arifumi Imai and Yasuyuki Ebara with him. These animators, along with a few other names, would create one of the most bombastic and high-octane displays of action animation, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. During the early stages of production, some important decisions needed to be made. For example, what would the character designs look like? Kyoji Asano came up with these relatively simple designs with thick outlines. The lack of detail made them easier to draw, and the thicker outlines helped reduce inconsistencies. This is because thicker lines can hide minor drawing errors. A lot of care was put into the world itself. The cities were extremely lifelike in terms of their structure, which made the abnormality of the Titans more terrifying. Director Tetsuro Araki, CGI director Shuhei Yabuta, and action animator Arifumi Imai collectively decided how the ODM gear scenes would move. Fun fact, originally these action scenes were supposed to be fully CGI. Both the character and the backgrounds were supposed to be 3D, but thankfully this idea was dropped and they decided to go with a blend of the two dimensions. With that, the stage was set. Attack on Titan, one of the most talked about shows ever, started airing in the spring of 2013. The first episode also featured the first action scene, animated by Yasuyuki Ebara and Arifumi Imai, and it was one of the coolest things ever. The background was CGI and the 2D characters flew through it at breakneck speeds. The background being CGI meant that the hypothetical camera could move around without any limitations, and the characters moved accordingly. The entire scene was really dynamic in nature. Later on, we got some large-scale destruction animated by Takaki Chiba, some unique live-action-like camera work, and some uncanny Titan designs. This show had all the pieces. The first episode also featured quite a bit of character acting, most of which was animated by Yasuyuki Ebara. It made the chaos feel real. The frantic body language of both the main characters and the people around them made the scenes more devastating. The use of 3D backgrounds also helped with this effect. The camera moving through the CGI city heightened the tension. The CGI also helped the 2D animation keep up with the in-your-face direction. The first episode proved that Tetsuro Araki's larger-than-life vision would be realized by the staff. AOT wasn't afraid to look different. Season 1 also featured a respectable amount of character acting for an action-oriented show. Yasuyuki Ebara animated this exchange of words, and it's one of the most expressive scenes from this show. Just look at the amount of emotion packed into the facial expressions and the body language. Meanwhile, Arifumi Imai somehow managed to make this difficult-to-draw design move like it was nothing. In fact, he made the camera rotate around it. Keep in mind, every plate of armor had to be hand-animated, and if that wasn't insane enough, he snuck in some top-tier character acting. How is Imai real? It doesn't make any sense. Also, Cannonball POV. Long story short, this show looked amazing. The action scenes were a joy to watch, with top-tier camera work made possible by the 3D backgrounds. Even the static scenes looked great, thanks to the top-notch artwork and backgrounds. Everything looked great, but when a studio this small produces a show this large, they are bound to run into some roadblocks. The staff was cutting it dangerously close. The episodes would be delivered at the last possible second. A few weeks after the show had started airing, character designer Kyoji Asano had to publicly ask for more animators to finish the season that was currently airing. The original TV release had quite a few off-model drawings and animation errors. At one point, they forgot to color in a layer of debris and some smoke. While all this was happening, fans of the show were getting ready for the first major fight. The Imai-Ebara combo was back, and naturally the fights looked spectacular. The camera work was dynamic. A character would be tiny in one frame and occupy most of the screen in the next one. The backgrounds were CGI as always, and the all-around presentation was perfect. The team decided to make the Colossal Titan 2D, and Arifumi Imai animated several cuts near the start. Animating the Colossal was effectively the same thing as animating a background. I'm sure it took just as seconds long, although I do feel like they overdid it a bit with the thick outlines. The anime heavily improved the action scenes. For example, they take this one panel from the manga and turn it into this long dynamic action sequence. The anime also handled abruptness really well. Titans would simply appear out of nowhere and make you jump out of your seat. Again, the 3D backgrounds helped with that. They would convey a realistic sense of distance and time, which in turn would make the jump scares more effective. Imai did a lot of work for the 5th episode, and his work basically cemented the main concept behind the ODM gear scenes, that being speed. Imai also storyboarded most of his scenes. This show looked different. The way it portrayed action was really unique, and the way it handled its horror aspect was quite creative as well. The way the Titans moved was unnerving. Some of the scenes were equal parts comedic and horrifying. It was a refreshing look. The team added textures to the Titans. This compositing effect made them look more detailed. I like this addition for the most part. The Attack Titans design was quite good and fairly consistent. Animator Hironori Tanaka drew one of the best versions of this design, with the sharp nose and the block-like jaw. The Titan animation was another aspect that made this show special. Titan combat felt impactful. Moving on, I did feel like the show overdid it with its camera work at times. For example, there's no reason for the camera to move the way it does here. There are other ways of conveying intensity. Anyway, the show kept doing its thing. The direction kept you on the edge of your seat, and the animation was dynamic, fast, and impactful. Arifumi Imai animated the most extra character acting imaginable in episode 10. Yasuyuki Ebara animated this top-notch slow-motion shot with some hyper-realistic skin movement. It's animated on ones, meaning this shortcut
needed over
72 individual drawings. Ebara also animated one of the best ODM cuts ever, 17 seconds of greatness. The harmony between the CGI and the 2D is perfect. The camera keeps moving and changing angles, complementing the animation. The entire city is CGI, which helps the characters move without any restrictions. Ebara's style of ODM movement is a bit different from Imai's. His movement is less controlled and more wild, if that makes any sense. Episode 13 featured the most consistent Attack Titan scenes. Arifumi Imai in particular drew Eren so well. He also animated this climactic scene with the vivid and powerful expressions on Eren's face as he slams that rock down, followed by a large amount of wind effects. A phenomenal scene. At this point, the schedule was probably catching up to them. The next few episodes were fairly underwhelming, with episode 17 being the next big action episode. I loved the way they showed the troop positioning. This episode featured animation from both Imai and Ebara, but Titan animation director Takaki Chiba was the MVP. He's the reason why the female Titan looked so consistent throughout this episode. The next episode lacked that quality, but it did have a lot of amazing moments direction-wise. Love the camera work here. Also, the amount of suspense near the end was top-notch. The tense music and the perfect cutoff. Absolute cinema. It's direction like this that made this show special and helped fans overlook certain flaws. Does the CGI tree falling in the background look good? No. Do I care? No. Imai's ODM scene was so well choreographed. It had the perfect amount of anticipation and timing. The next couple of episodes looked fairly underwhelming as well. Even the action was limited, but that didn't really matter because we got episode 21, featuring proper Titan versus Titan combat. The fact that they could animate this long fight between two different Titans is really impressive. Eren's transformation was animated by Yukina Kosaka, and it had some stunning lightning, wind, and particle effects. The entire fight was really well choreographed, with Arifumi Imai animating the most perfect section of it. Love the foreshortening here. Eren's fist is a lot larger than his head because it's closer to the camera. Also love the hair movement. It bounces with every strike. Akira Hamaguchi came through with one of the most insane ODM sequences. Most of the scene had a frame rate of 24. Naturally, the movement was really smooth and the wind effects only added to that. Needless to say, the scene was really dynamic. Mikasa closed in on and moved away from the camera on multiple occasions. Also, the female Titan drawings were amazing in the Blu-ray version. Imai animated the Levi female Titan fight, and it featured the iconic UFO scene. Now, does it make sense for Levi to turn into a Beyblade? Not really, but it's an example of stylization. It's there to get the idea across. Also, in all honesty, this scene wasn't that impressive in terms of its animation. Aside from the amazing smears on Annie's punch, not much happened. The attacks were mostly effects. The fight also reused a couple of cuts from episode 13. It wasn't that special. The final stretch of episodes, however, looked phenomenal. It was the culmination of everything I talked about so far. The dynamic camera work, the impact-heavy Titan animation and the fast-paced ODM animation, but dialed up to 11. Every other action scene looked top-notch. Ebara animated a smooth scene where he somehow made the female titan's face expressive. Imai was animating like his life depended on it, and a good portion of his scenes were animated on ones. The amount of spatial awareness you need to have to pull off a cut like this, it's hard to fathom how complicated this is. It starts as a near overhead shot, zooms in, wraps around Annie's body all while rotating upside down and back. It's ridiculous. So much so that I'm willing to ignore Annie gliding for 2 whole seconds. Also, the sheer amount of rocks and debris in this cut, all of which had to be hand animated. Insane work by Imai. The camera work steps up in the final episode, which just like episode 1, was storyboarded by Araki himself. The style of animation changes from fast-paced to impact-heavy. Every single hit felt harsh and powerful. Ebara animated one of the most chaotic cuts of Eren, with the wild beast-like movement. Also, the camera work is top tier. As always, Imai animated the best looking scene. He packed so much energy into this one hit. The erratic head movement, the exaggerated perspective on the arm, the perfectly timed smears and the camera movement throughout. There's a reason why Imai is one of the greatest action animators of all time. Also, Eren's own hand rips apart the second it makes contact. Such an amazing scene. Season 1 is still the best looking AOT season. It was a show which felt larger than life, and one which went above and beyond as far as the action was concerned. Of course, I couldn't talk about every impressive scene, but I hope I was able to get the idea across. That's about it. Did you like this video? Check out this other bit of content on the screen. Like and subscribe, and until next time.